You're such an asshole.
So here's our third and final clary test request put to us by Hat and Clogs, good old Hat down south. And I think he was doing drugs because he says, let's do a clary test on Sydney Sweeney, Salma Hayek. Okay, fine. And the S&P 500. Yes, I want you to have fun while doing this task. What makes you think this is fun? I mean, redheads with big boobs are fun, but, where's the redheads with big boobs come in here? We're coming up on it. Use your imagination mostly on the S&P 500 waifu bot that has red hair, big boobs, and loves making you money. I wouldn't interpret the S&P 500 as that. I mean, if you want to look, just say what would be the clary test on a waifu bot or the Stepford housewife, whatever you want to call it. Well, did it come from wealth? No. Did it major in stupid stuff? No. Does it do a real job? Not really. It doesn't have agency. It's not sacrificing anything when it works. It's just energy. Like, it doesn't work. And then the S&P 500. So I took the S&P 500 in its real form and tried to map it on as best I could to the clary test. So in the end, do a real clary test, but spice it up for the S&P 500 and have fun and do it like an SNL skit. I don't have the resources for it. So the S&P 500. All right, so let us go into Bizarro World. Let me get my notes up here. And we'll look at the S&P 500 and we'll apply the clary test to it. So my logic, as far as I could muster, was I would have to come up with the S&P 500 if it was a human. What would the S&P 500 be? And I got to look at the history of the S&P 500, what it is, what does it do, and what would that look like in human form? So first, it is a product of wealth. It comes from wealthy companies. The S&P 500 is the top 500 companies, I think, in terms of market cap in the United States. So it had to come from wealth, but as is everyone else who was born into wealth, they didn't control that, right? Rich kids don't control whether they're born into wealth. They control whether or not they turn out to be assholes, and very few of them ever hedge against that because it's hard. But of the unfair points we apply in the clary test, it's were your parents rich? That's not under your control. Don't care. A lot of problems come from rich kids. You guys are assholes, generally speaking. It's like smoking and getting lung cancer. It's a pretty good predictor. So the S&P 500 is a product of wealthy companies. So it comes from wealth. Now, here's where it can perform, and it does. The S&P 500 is a meritocracy-based, performance-based index. If you don't keep up, you get knocked off the index. So the index is merit-based. I mean, that's what it meant. Well, at least it set out to measure was merit. And so it does not get penalized a point on that. So it's like a rich kid, but it worked for a living. That's basically what I'm saying. Didn't major in easy bullshit things. Well, we all know the answer to this. The S&P 500, especially today, what do you major in? Business. A bunch of dickless finance bros who don't know the math underlying the finance, and now, especially today, are just big idea guys taking other people's money, paying out 3% and trying to make 8%. That's all it is. So it gets a point today. Now, we could argue that in times past, the S&P 500, majoring in business, that was worthwhile. So if we were to do like the S&P 500 in 1950, we would apply the grandfather clause where any degree actually was a good degree back in 1950, because not every dumbass jamoke went to college. Now, especially today, the S&P 500, especially who leads the companies and the people that put the valuations on the companies and the banks and the investor companies that invest, you are all a bunch of 103 IQ fuckwit business majors with maybe an emphasis in finance. You are truly mid people. So today I would give the S&P 500 a point A. They're mid-level IQ egotists. And then finally, what is it doing today? Well, what was the S&P 500 supposed? Well, it's supposed to here's a bulwark, here's an index that measures the large. It's supposed to measure the performance and valuation of ultimately the economy, because all production does inevitably come through corporations, not just there are more corporations than the 500 in the S&P 500, but it's a metric. How is the economy? How's our production doing? Yeah, see, that's been abandoned long ago. Maybe I was the last generation to see where any kind of stock market index was a measure of production and wealth. Now it is a measure of inflation and capital market manipulation. I'm not even talking in a conspiratorial government is controlling the stock price. It's not that. It's just it doesn't do what it was measured to do. In the old days was to measure generally economic production through the profits of the company. Now the S&P 500, all the indices, you guys don't give a flying fuck about fundamentals. You don't give a shit about dividends. You don't give a shit about earnings. I dare I say you don't even give a shit about EBITDA. It's just sales, bro, growth, bro, AI, bro. We're leveraging, we're buying, and all you've done, I'm not even joking. I have to do the math. I don't want to say all, but I would bet you a majority of the stock market increase in the past quarter century has just been flooding the market with money. And when I say capital market manipulation, I mean people doing leverage buyouts, private equity paying through the nose for this shit, private equity taking their shit company and trying to release it as a public company again, cross ownership, all that. And meanwhile, the PE ratio went from 15 when I was a sensible young man to now I think it's 33. 33? Like your rate of return, it's going to take me 33 years to break even. All the S&P 500, it's what it's doing today is measuring financial tricks. That's it. Flooding market with capital. That's it. Low interest rates, bro. Leverage fine. We're going to borrow money so we can put that into equity, even though it's borrowed money, so we can get more money to borrow. There ain't a fucking ounce of real work being done by the S&P. And all of you, all the S&P, maybe not all, but most of you, all you do is just AI, bro, leveraging synergies, bro, subscription service, bro, outsource, bro, India and AI, bro. There's no production. It's just cost cutting and lower quality. That's it. It's just enshittification. That's your strategy, bro. So it doesn't do anything that it used to measure. Like back in the day, say like 30. The Ford Motor Corporation made cars and they sold cars and their GDP would be whatever, $100 million worth of cars sold. There was probably $100 million worth of car value. Today, Ford especially, you guys, what is it? You're up to 115 recalls in 2025 alone because you outsourced your engineering to Mexico. And then like you outsourced your manufacturing overseas all over the place. And now the dickless wonderfuck known as the CEO of Ford, I forget his name, he's complaining because there's not enough mechanics. Like, no, there would be enough mechanics if you didn't make shitty cars. Their brand new cars weren't breaking down. If you didn't have 115 recalls, Ford, you wouldn't need that many mechanics. So whatever the sale, the same $200 million worth of cars they sold are not $200 million worth of economic production. So that you get a point on that. So you come from wealthy parents. You majored in dumb shit. What are you doing today? You're just manipulating stock prices. Essentially, you're not producing anything of value. You get a 3. You are not a hot redhead I would fuck. You are a fat, loud, I mean, you're like, who heads you up? Fat, dumb, mid-IQ dudes. You're nothing. You're fucking nothing. It's gotten bad enough. I'm starting to think I'm going to invest in something not the S&P 500. I want to invest in that Nancy Pelosi fund, although I don't know if they can keep tracking it because she's not working anymore. There's like an anti-diversity, DEI, ESG fund out there where they try and find companies that don't do the woke shit. I might invest in that. But yeah, I'm actually a little worried on the S&P, especially more so with the AI, where what is it? The top 7 companies with AI, that's what's driving it up. And I'm like, that's not real profit. It's just manipulation. It's just a shell game now. And it shows. You can see in the dividend yield in the S&P 5, the PE ratio. So yeah, I would not have a beer with the S&P 500. I mean, if you want to turn it into a woman, it is a fat, entitled, loud girl boss. Imagine the girl bosses of today, but 25 years from now. So they're spinsters, the eggs all dried and frozen up. They're angry, they're feminist, they're fat, they got whatever, they got attitude and lip, and nobody produces a fucking lick of profit. And they absolutely should not run. Absolutely should not run for public office. Absolutely not. Chad Twizzler, $2. Cappy, I need a new cigar to try. Any suggestions? Try a PDM. PDM, it's the the green and gold label. PDM. All right, that's it. See you guys later. Toodles.